We've never had levels of volatility in Britain like this. And by that, what I mean is people moving from one party to another. You know, Liberal Democrats going to Labour, Conservative voters going to Reform, Conservative voters going to none of the above, saying they're not going to vote. We've had 10 years of populist revolts in British politics. UKIP, Brexit, Boris Johnson. So nothing is impossible, okay? So what we are on the cusp of is something that I think Britain has never really seen before, which is the implosion of the dominant Conservative Party, one of the most successful political parties in the history of democracy. Why is that? Because it presided over mass immigration, it presided over inflation, it presided over the collapse of our public services, National Health Service, schools, infrastructure, but more fundamentally, it became completely disconnected from the realignment that Brexit introduced. Brexit gave the Conservative Party a historic opportunity to win working class voters, non-university educated voters, older voters and Brexit voters. Those were the four groups that came behind the Conservative Party. But over the last 4 or 5 years, the Conservatives have alienated all of those groups of voters by giving them the opposite of what they promised. They didn't really make the best out of Brexit. They didn't give them lower migration. They didn't get tough on crime. They didn't define what is global Britain, what is our new role in the world, where are we going? And so those groups have abandoned the Conservative Party. So what I'm trying to say is the realignment that Brexit made possible, this big sweeping wholesale electoral change, has been completely squandered by the Conservatives who never really understood who was voting for them. I briefed Boris Johnson twice. I gave Boris Johnson 2 presentations on who was voting for him and why. And it was immediately clear to me that he really did not understand why all these working class voters were voting for him. He just thought he was popular, he was charismatic. And I kept saying, you do understand these people want things. They want lower migration. They want Britain to remain Britain. They want Britain to remain a Western country, Western ways of life, rule of law, with British values. They don't think Britain is racist. They don't think Britain is a backward country. They don't want to apologise for empire. They want to believe in who they are. And Boris Johnson and today's Conservatives have essentially become social liberals in that they've never really been able to understand or speak to national Conservatives out there in the country. And that is fundamentally why they've come unstuck.
Okay, now Matt, here's the £1 million question, if you like. If all this is the case, if the British are so unhappy about the disconnect between them and the cosmopolitan elite, why then is it that Labour now is by far the most popular party in the polls? I mean, it's leading ahead of the Tories by 20-odd%.
Yeah, the old saying in British politics is that opposition parties don't win elections, governments lose them. Yeah. What's happened is Conservatives have left the pitch. Conservatives have left the game. So if you look at all of our recent by-elections, what's happening is not the Labour Party vote going up. What's happening is the Conservative Party vote collapsing because many people are now saying, I'm not going to vote at all at the next election. I'm not going to participate in the next election. I'm certainly not going to move over to the Labour Party. So what Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has done is he's stabilised his party. He's won back some professionals, some university graduates. He's doing very well among British Muslims, by the way. About 80-90% are saying they're going to vote for the Labour Party. He's doing well among minority voters. But the story here is mainly about people leaving the political system. And this is really important because this is what happened before Brexit. Before the Brexit referendum, people just stopped voting.
You also speak of a counter-revolution against the new elite. And you also write in your book that Boris Johnson might have been able to tap into this counter-revolution as a character, as someone who came from a privileged background but still was able to connect with Brexiteers and working class. So do you think he missed a chance there?
Boris Johnson will go down in the history books as somebody that was given a unique opportunity to reshape British politics in the way that Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair reshaped British politics. But historians will remember him fundamentally as a failure.
Forgive me.
as somebody who didn't really get his arms around his party, around the country, around his new electorate. The counter-revolution against this new elite is very, very strong. It's comprised of working class voters, people that didn't go to university or didn't go to elite universities, and cultural conservatives. Many people in the professional classes too, who are saying, look, immigration's out of control. I'm worried about the rise of Islam in Western democracies. I'm worried about this alliance between radical Islamism and far left politics. I'm worried about the breakdown of law and order. I'm worried about gender ideology. I don't want my children being taught that a man can become a woman and a woman can become a man. All of these types of arguments and ideas, these are majority positions in Britain. Okay, these are majority positions. So the counter-revolution is very strong. The question is who can tap into it and mobilize it in to the extent that it can be mobilized in politics. So far, only Nigel Farage and initially Boris Johnson showed themselves able to do that. But there will be other figures in the future. There will be other politicians who tap into this incredible sense of frustration with our ruling class, a ruling class that doesn't really care about reflecting and articulating the values of the forgotten majority. And that is, I think, where we are in many Western democracies. It's why Trump is doing very well in the US. It's why Le Pen is doing very well in France. It's why Vox are doing very well in Spain, Chega in Portugal, Sweden Democrats, the AfD in Germany. It is a sense that the people who dominate the institutions are no longer in touch with the people who are living outside of those institutions in the rest of the country. So the answer is we need to reform the institutions. We need to make sure our public square is more representative and more respectful of the wider majority. That's the answer to this story. Now, of course, liberals will say, I don't want to do that. I want to keep the public square for myself. I want to shut down alternative voices. Well, you can keep doing that and see what happens. I mean, we will most likely end up with Donald Trump returning to the White House. We'll end up with President Le Pen. We'll end up with the AfD, I'm sure, doing very well at state elections at the end of this year across Eastern Germany, and probably doing very well in national polls as well, because I don't think fundamentally over the last 10 years, social liberals have really understood the strength of feeling against them.
Talking about voice and respect, as you just did, by voice, you mean that, or the ability to get heard in society and public and be respected for one's views. And I'd like to quote a passage from your book on this, where you say that while the new elite dominate the institutions, they also move to exclude the voice of groups that do not share their values and which are now glaringly underrepresented in media, politics, the creative industries, and more. Is the state of the institutions really that bad? Can you give examples of what you mean?
Well, I think certainly in Britain, the institutions are that bad. I think if you looked at our universities, just to start with one area where I'm familiar with as a university professor, between the 1960s and today, the ratio of left-wing academics to right-wing academics has increased from 3 to 1, so meaning for every 3 left-wing academics, there's 1 conservative, to 10 to 1. So for every 10 left-wing academics, there's 1 conservative.
Same in the US.
Well, it's worse in the US. In the US, it's in some institutions, you have no conservatives. In some areas, anthropology, sociology, it's 30, 40, 50 to 1. If you look at the BBC is dominated by the children of graduates and who often themselves went to the elite institutions and are much more socially liberal, I would argue radically progressive, woke, than the rest of the country. If you look at look at Parliament, the House of Commons, the biggest single group of members of Parliament in the British House of Commons are political careerists, people who have only ever worked in politics. They tend to have gone to elite universities. We know from surveys of MPs they lean much further to the cultural left than the average voter. So on issues like migration, multiculturalism, Israel, all of those issues, they are much further to the cultural left than the average voter. The museums, the galleries are falling over themselves to apologise for British history, to apologise for who we are, to say that we should be ashamed of our national identity. So I do think it is as bad as I say. Look, because we are supposed to be living in a representative democracy where everybody's voice is respected to the same degree. What we saw in the years after Brexit in this country was the opposite, which was the new elite, the ruling class, the losing side, treating the rest of the country as though it is a morally inferior mass of bigots, racists, transphobes, homophobes, and they displayed a level of prejudice that would not be directed to any other group in British society. I could not imagine the elite speaking in that way about Black Britons or British Muslims or LGBT communities. But when it came to the working class, when it came to white pensioners, when it came to Brexit voters, it was acceptable. You could mock, you could insult, you could dismiss, and this reflects the intolerance of the new elite. On the one hand, they say they are liberal, they say they are enlightened, but they are actually among the most illiberal group in our society.
So what you're saying is that we are seeing a backlash of people who feel not only unheard and not only disrespected for their values, but even condemned for their values.
What I'm saying is we're witnessing the rise of what I call in the book a luxury belief class. And what I mean by that is the new elite derive social status, esteem, honor, recognition from displaying their morally righteous, socially liberal views. It's become a new indicator of social status. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it was about going on the right holiday or having the right top hat, belonging to the right private members club here in Mayfair. That's what it was about. That's how you displayed your status. Today, you display your status through your luxury beliefs. You advocate policies that bring you no costs, but impose enormous costs on everybody else. Mass immigration, gender ideology, critical race theory. We should have weaker national borders. Why do the elite advocate those policies? They're not going to feel the full effects of them, but what those policies are going to do is make them feel good, allow them to signal their moral righteousness, and crucially, distinguish themselves from the inferior, the morally inferior masses who hold the wrong views, who hold the wrong beliefs. But actually, those beliefs are held by 80% of people in this country.